welcome to another edition of the AA team. My name's Ken Fang, along with my co-host Stephen Negishi, and I'm back after the last time I was away. I had an issue at work, so wasn't able to be on. But Stephen, thank you for hosting the show in my place. Much appreciated, and glad to be with you again this week.
Welcome back, Ken. Thank God that you were able to make it this week. Obviously you had to deal with the personal stuff last week, but last week we focused on the NFL draft, which was about a week or two away, and tonight we're definitely going to be reviewing the NFL draft to begin the show. So, we were able to reach out to several guests. Obviously, they were very, very busy shortly after the draft, without question. These people have been working around the clock leading up to this, momentous occasion. So any draft gurus out there who was able to come onto our show, we're definitely thankful, because obviously they deserve a significant amount of time between now and the college football kicks off in about late August. So.
Absolutely. And without further ado, let's bring in our first guest. It's Shane Hallam, Shane P. Hallam of the draftcountdown.com. And we're going to talk about a lot about the NFL draft. But Stephen, I know you as a Bears super fan have a lot to ask about Shane about the Bears. And then I'll come in later to talk about my team, the Browns. So without further ado, Shane, thank you for joining us today.
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate you guys bringing me on, man. It was a fun draft, so I enjoyed breaking it down.
Absolutely. And Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ken. All right, Shane, let's talk about the Bears draft. First and foremost, having done some search on the Bears draft over the weekend, do you like or do you don't like the Bears draft, and what grade would you give them as of today?
I like the Bears draft. I think in terms of the players that they picked, if you're just grading kind of pick by pick value and how they fit the team, I think we're talking about, a solid A-. I think it was a good draft as a whole. I know, if you want to kind of dig into, well, did they do enough to help Justin Fields? Was it enough to fill these needs? Then I think you can knock it down a little bit if you want to go at it that way. Personally, I just like to address, what I know, and that's the prospects and the value of the prospects. I thought it was really good. I mean, I thought, Kyler Gordon, their first pick, I had him graded as a first-round pick. So to get him at 39, get him in the second when they traded away their future first, I think was killer. I think he's a starting corner in the NFL. And almost every pick until – the sixth round, I think they got a guy that I liked higher than where they drafted them. I liked that player more. So to me, that's a really good draft. That is what you want. You're getting value. You're picking players that either have big potential or are, going to do good things for you immediately. And that's the key.
Okay. What do you think of the second round pick, Jaquan Brisker out of Penn State? That was somewhat of a real surprising selection. I think a lot of us Bears fans were hoping for George Pickens or trade down possibly to get more picks. Were you surprised by the Brisker pick?
I think I was a little surprised that the Bears took him, right? Like you said, I think a lot of people, myself included, were looking at, offensive tackle, we're looking at wide receiver, and there's a lot of value there. I think what Jaquan Brisker kind of brings to the table, and maybe why they took him, is you have a player who was the leader of that Penn State defense this year and last year. So, you're looking at someone in Brisker who it was a kind of vocal leader, had the green dot. He was the one kind of calling the plays and the defensive backfield shifts. He can command the defense, and that's not something you get all the time. So to me, I think it's a fit in that way where, the Bears defense, I think trading away Khalil Mack, what's the identity? Who's going to step up? I think Brisker is one of those players that's going to step up, become almost an instant leader, an instant impact player. So it makes a lot of sense to me if you're a new GM, new head coach, we want an identity. I think Brisker's an identity setter. He plays hard, hits hard, plays really smart, and has had a number of years of good experience in production.
One of the most controversial picks for the Bears was the third rounder, Velus Jones from Tennessee by way of USC. And I have to admit that I was on Twitter going a little bit overboard with his age, 25 years old. He's 25 this month. When you think of a guy like who's 25, you either think of a guy who's had some, real grade problems, had some run-ins with the law, or like in some cases, a former minor leaguer left the baseball and went back to school and became a NFL draft prospects or something like that. But so several questions regarding Jones. One, do you like the pick? Number two, what kind of an upside does he have as his age, where he is right now? And number three, was he overdrafted?
I think they're all good questions. And I think it's tough to look at, when you're talking about, okay, day two receivers and Christian Watson, George Pickens, and you're kind of getting excited before the draft for these type of players you think can be true number ones. You take Velus Jones. What Velus Jones brings to the table is not just the receiving option, but I think having a guy, in my opinion, is a top 3 return man in this draft, like elite special teams player. This isn't just, he returns kicks. Like, he was one of the best returners in college football playing in the SEC. Even the returners that I had graded above him, guys that also went day 2, Marcus Jones, the corner from Houston, for example, didn't do it in the SEC against these top athletes. Velus Jones is able to do that. So I think you get that like built in. You have a built-in role for him. And I think as a receiver, this is probably about where he'd go. I'd say maybe it's 20 picks too high. I would think maybe late third, but a lot of people had him as a late day 2 pick. If the Bears did not take him, they were not getting him in the next round. I'll tell you that. And there were a lot of teams interested. There were a lot of teams at the Senior Bowl who were very interested in him. He was brought in for numerous visits. Because this is a player that you're going to get like 4.3 speed. You're going to get the return ability. And something about Tennessee is the Tennessee Volunteers receivers don't get a ton of production. It's not a great passing offense. Run first. So a guy like Josh Palmer last year, the Chargers drafted, did decently for his first year. I thought that was similar to Velus Jones. Velus Jones should have done more. He was open. You watch the film. He was open and just no one to throw him the football. So what that says to me, now you have Justin Fields throwing the football. I think that's going to help. The age is an issue. It's a question, but I think when you draft someone, it's look, if he hits and at 29, he's going to his second contract, and you're like, okay, now we're worried about the age. He hit, and I think that's more important ultimately than the age itself. So, I think it's something that people poke fun of, but maybe it's better to have someone with a little bit more experience and that has some of this playing in the SEC, playing in the Pac-12. To me, I think that's the way to go.
Okay, so I feel a little bit better after spending the weekend trying to get myself, I think a lot of us were like 25, wow, so that's a little bit, and the fact that Justin Fields spent time with Ryan Poles to go over tapes, I think goes to show that maybe there's a bit of a validity to that. On the third day, the Bears probably went on the offensive lineman spree pretty much in the 5th and the 6th round. Out of the offensive linemen that the Bears picked, who has the best chance of not only sticking with the team, but also making a contribution, maybe not as a starter, but perhaps maybe as a, maybe a swing guy or something like that?
Not to just take the highest drafted guy, but I think Braxton Jones, the offensive tackle from Southern Utah, if you had told me that he was drafted in the 3rd round, I wouldn't have blinked an eye. He was my 13th ranked offensive tackle in this class and ended up going much later than that. He's just a top tier athlete, like really explodes off the snap. In that level of competition, obviously it's not the highest level of competition, but there's some speed rushers. He did not have any trouble with those guys. And he can kind of pop in the run game too. I think he has a little bit of those hands. He just needs to figure out how to do some of the technique stuff, hand placement, how to get the proper leverage. He doesn't always get those knees bent properly. So I think that's why he kind of fell as, okay, there's some work to do, but he has the athletic upside that you need for an NFL offensive tackle, a starting offensive tackle, in my opinion, if you can coach him up and get kind of the technique down pat. So, I think he has a chance to become a permanent player on that roster. You could play left tackle, right tackle, like you said, maybe a swing backup with some upside for more. I think there is some upside for more. So he was probably my favorite offensive line pick. But I also think the 6th round pick of Zach Thomas is really intriguing in a lot of similar ways. I think Zachary Thomas out of San Diego State was my ranked 14 guard. Just, long arms, very tall. His foot speed's pretty good. He makes a lot of mental errors, and I think that's why he fell. Like, there's definitely some film where he's just guesses wrong, or he shifts his weight the wrong way and just makes some mental mistakes in terms of reading the pass rusher. So, but as a late round pick, I mean, you get a guy that's tall, athletic, has the arm length. I like this. If you have confidence in your coaching staff, then these are the kind of players I think you should draft. Guys that have the upside to be starters. And it wouldn't surprise me if we get like 2 of these day 2 or day 3 offensive linemen end up making a significant impact, maybe if there's an injury on that offensive line this year or next year.
Mm-hmm. One of the guys that a lot of people are very, very high on is the HBCU player, Jater Carter. Do you see him maybe being a guard, perhaps maybe kicked inside and be a starter, perhaps as early as this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe he needs a little bit more time to kind of develop himself. I'll say for Jater Carter, like he hustles. He doesn't take plays off the snap. He is quick. I think he could even play a little offensive tackle, but is obviously much better in guard. That's where they drafted him. So I think he outworks. He outworked the defensive lineman when he played there at the HBCU, and that combined with some athleticism that he flashed it in the lower body, then I think you have upside. You have a guy that's going to work hard on the field and off the field, and he has some requisite foot movement and athleticism. Then there's some upside there. I think in the 7th round, I mean, that's the kind of shot you want to take, is a player that has the size, has some of the athleticism, and is a hard worker. It's a big jump to the NFL. I think that's going to be the big question. But I think he could end up as a reserve player for the Bears down the line.
I apologize. I have accidentally logged myself out there for just a little bit there.
Yeah, you're good.
Shane P. Hallam from the Draft Countdown is joining us to review the Chicago Bears draft on the AA team tonight. The rest of the draft, obviously they got a punter, a kicker, and a very excitable safety. Let's round up the rest of the draft picks, and what do you see out of them for the Bears in the upcoming season?
I think it's really interesting. I really like Dominic Robinson, the edge rusher out of Miami of Ohio. When I watched the bowl game for Miami of Ohio, I mean, he was living in the backfield. I mean, every single play, he just, those long arms when he was playing against offensive linemen with shorter arms. I mean, he abused them. And when you see a game like that, you're like, dude, I want this guy on my team. Now you go back and watch certain film when he's playing against better competition. He struggled. He clearly has the athletic build, the length, the explosion, but just doesn't know how to use it. It seems like a similar theme. Like I said, it seems like the Bears have confidence they can coach these guys up, and that's really what the focus was. Let's get players that can play. There were a lot of teams. The Colts, for example, did the exact same thing. So I think Dominic Robinson's a player I'm really excited about, because I do think as a situational, rotational pass rusher, there's some upside there. And then Trenton Gill is kind of interesting. He's not a punter I expect to get drafted at pick 255. But, did get invited to the combine, which for punters is a little bit rare, to have. And I think the best thing Trenton Gill does is kickoffs. I mean, his kickoffs were very, very good, very solid, usually ended up in the end zone almost always. So I think that's kind of built in with him. And he punts pretty quick. So something I look for in punters is, do they get the ball off quick, or is there block opportunities here? And he's not a guy that's going to get the punt blocked a little bit. Maybe he doesn't quite have the consistency, or hang time, but I think there's some good things to like about him. So I think that was an intriguing pick, and I'll be rooting for him maybe to win that punting job this year.
All right. What about the kicker, Tristan Ebner? Does he have maybe more of a punt returner type kick returner, along with the Velus Jones, to help out the offense with the position?
Yeah, he was a track guy in high school. He was definitely like a big track athlete. When he gets up to full speed and he does really quickly, he becomes tough to bring down. So, sometimes going through traffic when he gets through the line of scrimmage, he slows down and doesn't get knocked backwards. He's one of those players that falls forward, picks up those extra yards, kind of churned out the tough stuff. His teammate Abram Smith, who didn't get drafted, did a little bit more of the outside work this past season. So I like Ebner as a reserve running back that could have a shot on special teams. I think you put him back there, have him and Velus Jones kind of compete to fill that spot. But, I think the Bears offense, as we see, is kind of moving in a direction of the Packers. You don't need a ton of receivers, but have a group of running backs so you can spell guys, keep guys healthy, and keep them, fresh, and just wear down a defense and then hit them with the big plays, Darnell Mooney, Velus Jones down the field. And it's going to be tough to stop. So I'm really interested to see if Ebner makes the roster if he gets some usage.
Is there anybody on the UDFA that they signed over the weekend that kind of like intrigues you the most for the Bears?
I was definitely looking at, when we were looking at the Bears, like, okay, is there a receiver that they signed that interested me? And there's one that kind of stood out. I'm here in Pittsburgh and is a very local, small college, but Cyrus Holder, the wide receiver from Duquesne, is, watching Duquesne this year. I mean, he was open all the time down the field. Like he is fast, he's athletic. And so I think for a team that maybe could use another reserve wide receiver, there might be some interest there. He's definitely a player that I'm interested in, that I like. In terms of big upside too, Master Teague, the running back from Ohio State, worked out really, really well at the pro day. He never quite had a full range of, working through vision, working through the gap. He kind of ran forward. So I think he's a project, but a really intriguing one who's like one of the best athletes at running back in this entire draft. I also like Gene DeLance, the offensive lineman from Florida, and Jack Sanborn, the linebacker from Wisconsin, is a player, very tough, good tackler, special teams player. So it wouldn't surprise me if a couple of these guys make special teams impacts on kickoffs, things like that.
We cannot leave the question without asking about the rest of the NFC North. The way I look at it, I think all three teams certainly got their guys, and they really improved themselves. What do you think of the rest of the NFC North? Who had the best draft out of the three teams out there?
I'd probably go with the Detroit Lions. I just like the way the Lions are building their team, that they are building kind of from the inside out. I mean, last year they drafted offensive lineman, defensive lineman. This year is, okay, let's get edge rushers, right? They got Aiden Hutchinson, number 2, obviously, but I really like the Josh Paschal pick in the second round from Kentucky. A good leader, really vocal guy who has good pass rush skills. And then they got some, heavy game changers. Jameson Williams, I think the trade up was cheap and brilliant for them to do. Right. And then Kirby Joseph, the safety from Illinois in the third. I think he's an explosive playmaker. And they have 2 2023 picks. So if they need to move up for a quarterback, I think they've built that team. I just really like what they did the most and how they're building their squad, which is odd to say about the Detroit Lions. Not usually something I come in here saying after a draft.
That's true. I was scratching my head when the Minnesota and Detroit made that trade, and Minnesota could probably gotten a little more, considering how far they moved down, and they should have probably gotten a first-round pick from the Detroit Lions, because Minnesota thought that they were fleecing, but it turned out that the value just wasn't there. The Packers drafted Christian Watson, who many people wanted, including myself. How do you see him fitting in with the Packers and their passing game?
I'm as big a Christian Watson fan as you'll find. He was my 6th ranked receiver in this draft. I've been touting him for a while. I had an article back in early January that I think his career is going to be like Cooper Kupp, take a year and then kind of take off. I mean, I think he's a great fit, and the Packers have had success in the second round. I think he'll be very similar to Jordy Nelson there. This guy can get down the field, but has that size that you can't just stuff him at the line. And my big question with Christian Watson was route running. Can he do it? He didn't really have to do it that much then at the Senior Bowl. I mean, that's what he excelled at. It was like, if all these things come together, I mean, this guy could be really good. So that is scary for the rest of the NFC North, but we'll see if Aaron Rodgers trusts Watson enough year one. I'm not sure we see as much of Christian Watson as I would have liked to in this first year.
We're speaking with Shane P. Hallam of Draft Countdown. And Shane, I know we've been mostly Bear-centric, but I have to ask about my Cleveland Browns. The Browns had a mixed bag, and of course, some of the draftniks have been saying their highest grade is going to their kicker that they drafted out of LSU. Not a good draft for me as a Browns fan. That's not good. A good sign when your highest grade goes to a kicker. But still, your honest assessment of the Browns draft.
I think it was solid for not having a pick in the first 2 rounds. I think it always looks worse than it is. But they drafted one of my top 10 corners in Martin Emerson from Mississippi State, who I think is a really good zone corner with good ball skills that SEC teams threw away from him. They don't want to mess with him. That's usually a good sign. I thought the David Bell pick at 99 overall, a lot of people will look at the workout and say, wow, this is bad. But I mean, this is the guy that as an 18-year-old was dominating Ohio State, was dominating in the Big Ten. That's usually a good sign. Like, I don't care how athletic you are, usually you'll get it done. Then I thought the best pick was Perry Winfrey, the defensive lineman from Oklahoma. I had rated as a top 50 player, getting him at 108. The fit, I'm interested to see where they play him, what the fit is. He's not a run stuffer by any means. Like, he's an explosive first step pass rush only. But if you can find a rotation or a place to fit him in, I think it's good. I thought the Browns had a very solid draft for, like I said, not having a pick in the first 2 rounds. They did well with the third rounders, and I really like that Winfrey pick.
And of course, they had their the big compelling thing for about 7 minutes was the potential trade with Carolina, which didn't go down, and it appears that Baker's probably going to be staying with the Browns for a while. But that's a whole different other story. What about the rest of the AFC North?
I thought the AFC North had a pretty solid draft as a whole. I mean, Baltimore was I think everyone's like, oh, but this Baltimore draft was great. It was. It's not flashy, but like to get Kyle Hamilton is my 3rd rated player in the draft at 14, to get Tyler Linderbaum, who I had in the top 20 at 25. I mean, it was just kind of a value pick at every spot, and they got all those 4th rounders to kind of clean up that value they knew was going to be there. It was just a smart way to work the board. The Steelers, I like the George Pickens and the Marvin Leal picks, but it's going to come down to Kenny Pickett's a franchise quarterback or not. If he's not, it doesn't matter what else you did in this draft. No one's going to remember it. I wouldn't have taken Kenny Pickett at 20 myself, but no one knows him better than, I guess, the Steelers working out in the same facility. So
yes.
We'll see what happens there. And I thought the Bengals had a solid draft for picking at 31. They got some impact players, and really they knew their weakness. The weakness was the secondary. Let's, we spent on the offensive line. Let's just draft all secondary guys. I think that's a smart way to approach it too.
Mm-hmm. So who had the best draft overall out of the 32 teams, and who had the worst draft of the 32?
Best draft. I'll go maybe a little bit off the board. I think people are giving them high marks, but I think the New York Jets actually had the best draft. They took Sauce Gardner, who is my number 1 corner, as the number 2 corner. They took Garrett Wilson, my number 1 receiver, as the number 2 receiver. They took Jermaine Johnson, who I had as a top 10 pick at 26. I thought the move up for Breece Hall was cheap. Jump the Texans. You get a 3-down starting running back. They get a 2-way tight end in Jeremy Ruckert, who's going to be a nice safety blanket. I think they helped Zach Wilson, got him what he needed, and got weapons to build this offense. So to me, I think that was one of the one of the better drafts as a whole. I think worst draft is always tough to like pinpoint a team and say, oh, this was bad. I mean, honestly, I guess like New England's the easy pick. I would actually say Jacksonville for having the number 1 pick just didn't do good enough for me. Like, I'm not a Trayvon Walker fan. I think, I think the athleticism, the upside's huge, but he had the least amount of sacks of any edge rusher drafted in the top 3 since the year 2000, when they started tracking sacks in the NCAA. That's not a great sign. I think you're kind of giving your wagon to them. They drafted 2 off-ball linebackers. I like Devin Lloyd. I like Chad Muma. but I just don't think it's a super important position. And I thought the rest of their picks were average. I think for a team picking first, usually that's an easy draft to say this is a good draft, and it's just not to me. So I'll actually go with Jacksonville and not just rehash New England taking players around early every time, because every time I bash a Bill Belichick draft, it just goes the wrong way for me. So
that was going to be my question. Were you as surprised as the Rams were that they decided to draft Cole Strange?
Not quite as bad as the Rams were. I wasn't looking at him at 104. I'll say that. I thought he was going to go in round 2, but it was super surprising to see him get drafted in the first round. I mean, I don't think anyone did. I think Pro Football Focus said they had 500,000 people do a New England Patriots mock drafts in their simulator. 2 took Cole Strange in the first round. I don't know. Those 2 had to be Bill Belichick just trying things out. But
exactly.
No one saw this coming. No one saw this coming.
Exactly.
So I know you're probably busy, and we'll try to wrap it up in a few minutes. But regarding the Bears going forward, now that the draft is over, what players out there on the market, like probably still a free agent who is still out there that can help out, the Bears offensively and defensively?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're the Bears now, it's about can I take a look at what's going to help my offense? I think you want to be able to support Justin Fields as much as possible. Are there players still out there? Can you assign Will Fuller? I think that would be a nice signing. Who receivers with Houston for a while, signed at Miami, didn't do much. He got hurt. He gets hurt a lot, but
that's a problem.
That is a problem. But to me, that's fine. Let's bring him in. You can probably get him pretty cheap. He's another deep threat. And when he's healthy, get him on the field, then hopefully it adds another weapon. I think they just need to continue to look at someone. Maybe it's him, maybe it's T.Y. Hilton, maybe you want a veteran like that who can just come in and give some depth at that receiver position. I think it's the most important thing right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, Shane P. Hallam, we thank you very much. We appreciate you coming on at short notice, talking about the draft. One of the great draft crews around the country. We appreciate it. I know we have to go do another hit at the top of the hour, so we're going to let you go. We appreciate you coming on with us.
No, thank you for having me. It was fun to talk to you, and hope you good luck to the Bears and the Browns this year for both of you.
Thank you, Shane. We hope to have you again very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we will continue with the AA team. We have another guest coming up. We'll talk about that coming up after these messages, and also discuss what this month is all about. A very important month, as this is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and we'll discuss all that coming up on the AA team on the Barnum Network after this.
Zim, Joe, Vinny, and Gonzo. Join these White Sox fanatics every Monday night for the South Burbs Hitmen. You're going to be treated to great guests, top analysis, smart debates. South Burbs Hitmen with Zim, Joe, Benny, and Gonzo, only on the Barroom Network.
And South Burbs Hitmen will be coming up right after this show at the top of the hour. Not this hour, but next hour, 8 o'clock, coming up here on the Barroom Network. Stephen, we have our next guest coming up. That's going to be Mark Fainaru-Wada, a spectacular investigative journalist for ESPN. We're going to be talking to him about some of the stories he's made about the owner of the Brooklyn Nets and his ties to Alibaba and his ties to China. We'll talk about that coming up. But let's, in the short time that we have here before he comes on, Stephen, this is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. It just began. And some of the things that we can discuss is, of course, some of the increased violence against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the AAPI community that has happened over the last 2 years. It's something that's a report that came out. I saw that NBC News yesterday, and it's very distressing. And it's one of the reasons why we have this show, to call out violence and to also call out bad behavior against the AAPI community.
Oh, absolutely. And, I'm very, very thankful for the the Barroom Network for giving us the platform to do this show. It's been very, very fun and also resourceful. There's no question that the violence towards our community has not died down, unfortunately. There's been a steady, cases in New York, LA, and San Francisco, and then, some other cities, unfortunately. And, for us to have this platform to talk with the AAPI members who work in the sports and entertainment industry, which unfortunately there are not many of them. And, it is a struggle to come up with the guests who work with us. And, just like we saw with Shane, who's obviously not an Asian person, but, we definitely ask our guests whenever we invite them to our guests as a guest, that there is nothing political, obviously, about fighting the stigma that our community has had to endure the last 2 years. And, we will hope to continue to use this platform and whatever that is out there that both Ken and I can utilize to amplify our voices and, hopefully have a meaningful conversation, regardless of whether you're an Asian American or, Caucasian, African American, and Hispanics. Whoever's out there who wants to talk with us and who wants to engage us in sports and social aspect of it, we will continue to do so.
And as we've talked about, we're on every other Monday, usually on at 6 o'clock Eastern time, 6 o'clock Central time, or no, 7 o'clock Central time, and then usually for an hour. But in the past, we've had been 2 hours, and we've talked about we've called out a lot of bad behavior against the Asian Pacific community. And Nomad, thank you very much, and we really appreciate you standing with us, and we appreciate all the allies that are with us here on this show. And like we said, we've called out some bad behavior, whether it's been the talk about Shohei Ohtani by Stephen A. Smith, whether it's been the bad behavior. We're also even called out some great behavior. If you remember, we had the MMA fighter who fights mostly in Taiwan, who will also help diffuse the situation. We had him on earlier in our series. So we're always looking for, we're not just also calling out bad behavior, but we also want to call out the good when we see it.
Absolutely. It's not just about negativity. There have been some progress. There's no question. Pablo Torre and Mina Kimes from ESPN have had their, platforms, and they have, done a great job. I still have some questions as to maybe, hopefully that those two who have their own platform, obviously a bigger one, we've called them out, for maybe not doing enough with Mikey Chen from the Irish Wire at the beginning, at the very first show. And we hope that this month they will utilize those voices.
And thank you, Ravi, also for your comments as well.
Thank you, Ravi.
Let's bring in our next guest. It's Mark Fainaru-Wada, who is one of the best reporters that you find out there. He's some of the things he's best known for was League of Denial, which he wrote about the NFL and the concussion scandal. Also, if you go back to 2004, 2005, he and Lance Williams wrote about the Balco scandal and Game of Shadows. Mark has been doing some great work for ESPN, also writing about Joe Tsai, the one of the owners of the Brooklyn Nets. We'll be talking to him about that tonight. Mark, thank you for joining us tonight.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Mark, let's talk a little bit about some of the work that you're doing right now, looking into the NBA's relationship with China and some of the stuff that's going on with Joe Tsai. If you're not familiar, Joe Tsai is one of the partners and principal owners of Alibaba. And if you're not familiar with Alibaba, think about Amazon on steroids. It's much bigger. It's one of the bigger e-commerce sites that you'll ever see. And when I first hit Alibaba one day, when I was going through a rabbit hole on something, I was like really amazed at some of the stuff that you can find there. Mark, let's talk a little bit about Joe Tsai and the NBA and its relationship with China.
Sure, absolutely. We decided to look into, spend some time exploring Joe Tsai in the wake of, you might remember, if you follow the NBA back in 2019, Daryl Morey, who was at the time the general manager of the Houston Rockets, tweeted his support of
Yes.
protesters in Hong Kong.
Right.
And that event, which seemed sort of innocuous at the time, basically set off an international incident. The NBA was abruptly removed from television in China. Sponsors fled the league in China, and the league was basically barred from television for nearly 3 years. And so we started working on stories related to that, and that ultimately led us to take a look at Tsai, because Tsai is really, the Mori tweet underscored the complex nature of having a relationship with an authoritarian regime, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got the NBA, which is, perhaps more forward thinking than any other league in dealing with human rights issues and talking about social justice issues here in the States. At the same time, doing business with a country in which human rights abuses have been alleged on significant levels, particularly in a region in Western China known as Xinjiang. And there it's alleged that China is basically put more than 1 million Uyghur Muslims in effectively concentration camps. They call them re-education camps.
Right.
So we wanted to look at Tsai, ultimately this conflict, and we chose to look at the conflict through Tsai, because here's a guy who perhaps personifies the conflict more than anybody. He's the owner of the Brooklyn Nets. He's very active on social justice issues here in the States. Yet, as you mentioned, he's a co-founder of Alibaba, a company that is doing business with at least 2 companies that have been alleged to be part of the surveillance state created in Xinjiang. As well as that, it was Tsai, who after Mori's tweet issued his own Facebook post in which he seemed to be defending the Chinese government, basically, in their reaction. And his reaction created a stir. And so it was that led us to decide we wanted to take a look at Tsai's positions on China as a way of looking at the conflict the NBA faces.
And that's it's really interesting, as you mentioned, that conflict, because as you mentioned, Tsai has been defended China in his Facebook posts. This despite him also being from Taiwan, which has its own issues with China, and we can go on that for days. But it's quite interesting to see how, as you mentioned, this conflict that he has, being very vocal about social justice here in the United States, and also trying to defend the country where he's doing business with.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it really, I think for us, personified, as I mentioned, this conflict. Tsai, again, has been, he's spent millions of dollars. Here's a guy he's worth more than $8 billion, and he's spent considerable amounts of money on issues related in the States to everything from Black Lives Matter to anti-Asian hate. The Barclays Center actually had become sort of a hub for the social justice movement in Brooklyn during Black Lives Matter. And, and he really embraced that. But when it came to discussing issues around human rights abuses in China, of which there are these very serious allegations, he was much more reticent to talk about it. But also, I think what was really interesting was to look. We spent a lot of time on the web just looking for any and every possible statement we could find from him. Anytime he'd been interviewed, lots of those, were academic institutions where he's speaking in symposiums. And there's a lot of comments for him that are quite interesting in the contrast to the way we look at things in the West. So, for example, Tsai's position, and this is backed up when we talk to sources, really seems to be that in a one-party system like they have in China, there's a belief and a need to suppress certain abilities for dissent, maybe even a free press to some degree, in the name of economic stability. And that's simply his position. And obviously that's not a position that is terribly comfortable for a lot of people in the West.
Mm-hmm. Tsai has some very a lot of business holdings. And one thing that I noticed in the story that you've written, that not only does he have Alibaba Group, but he also has several sports holdings. So it's interesting to see that not only does he have the Nets, but he also is involved with lacrosse and the Premier Lacrosse League and the LAFC and the MLS. It's something that his tentacles have really reached all over the United States.
Yeah, he's obviously a huge sports fan. I mean, he talked about in some of the speeches we've seen from him, he talks about he came to the States when he was 13. He was sent here and he went to private boarding school. His father had come here and gone to Yale, actually, and become a successful lawyer before going back to Taiwan and opening his own practice and also working in the government. Sai came to the States at 13, and he didn't speak any English. His family background really is Chinese. He is born in Taiwan, and he's from there, but he has talked about how he views himself as Chinese. His parents were both born there, and so he came here and he didn't speak any English, but he played sports, and he has talked about in some of these speeches about how sports were really a bridging mechanism for him. They allowed him to feel much more in touch and much less of an outsider. And so he played some football in high school, and he played lacrosse, and he really came to embrace lacrosse. And that is extended in all sorts of ways. So he, in addition to playing lacrosse, he's a massive lacrosse fan. He played at Yale as a walk-on, and now he's bought into teams and leagues and is a big proponent of trying to push lacrosse in the U.S. And then by virtue of buying into the Nets or buying the Nets, he also now owns the Liberty. He owns Barclays Center. Sports. He has viewed sports as this sort of ability to bridge two worlds, as he's described it at various points.
We've discussed about on our show about sports washing that the FIFA, the Qatar, and China has utilized over the years. You mentioned about China's ever-growing presence in the entertainment industry. If you go to a movie theater or streaming, you're going to see some studio names that is Tencent, which is a Chinese e-commerce company, among other things. You're going to see that a lot of those if you go watch a movie at the beginning or the end credits and stuff. So that's the the huge outreaching goal that we see on a normal, regular basis. Do you look at Joe as some sort of a guy who is caught in a rock between hard places, trying to appease both the U.S. and China?
I mean, I try not to analyze. I think a lot of the people we talked to viewed that as what was going on, that there's a desire. We quote several experts and people who were involved in the dynamic that there was a challenge for Sai and frankly the league to deal with this conflict, right, of balancing their own personal views. Although again, Sai has talked openly about how his personal views may be about China, may be in conflict with how we all view, free speech and dissent here in the States. Just a different dynamic, and his desire to sort of point out that we're talking about two different political systems. But I don't think there's any doubt that there are people who viewed his Facebook post, the league's reaction, and his subsequent position around allegations that he tried to get Maury fired, which he denies, as being rooted in this challenge between trying to live with a foot in both worlds, basically. And if you're going to do business in China, as you pointed out, I mean, the NBA is hardly alone in this. Virtually every company, and we noted this in our story, that Disney, which owns ESPN, and ESPN is a partnership with Tencent, the company you mentioned. So we're all dealing with these conflicts, and so it's not unique, but there is a balancing act that people have to do if they're going to do business in China.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Mark, also too, it's interesting that about Sai. Have you managed to get him to comment for the story at all?
No, he declined to participate. He declined to comment on the record and talk about this for the story. We talked to sources who were familiar with his thinking, and so we felt like we got a sense of his position and a validation that the comments and things we'd read and heard from him were not taken out of context. We're in keeping with his beliefs. And again, I think he lays them out very clearly. It's a clear position that that China is in a position, he argues, that is not as advanced economically as the U.S., and that in order for there to be economic stability in the country, there needs to be these kinds of the kind of ability to fast forward, if you will, through issues that maybe get sidetracked in the States. And again, I don't think that's a very popular message here in the States. Though he has not commented on any of the human rights abuses or addressed those or touched those. He got asked in generally about human rights abuses during a CNBC interview 2 years ago or a year ago, and he basically sort of avoided the question. He said you'd have to be specific about which ones, and the interviewer did not follow up on which ones he was talking about. And Tsai's message was, look, I think most people in China are happy and are happier than they've been every year. And that's the position he takes.
Mm-hmm. You've written a couple of articles related to NBA in China with your brother, Steve Fainaru, about the NBA's investigation into NBA China Academy. Is there any ties or correlations to the article you wrote about Joe Tsai's and his involvement with both the NBA and China?
I mean, the link is just the topic, really. The story we did about abuses at the NBA academies in China was the first story we did together, at least, that stemmed out of the Mori tweet. I mean, the Mori tweet was really fascinating to us. To see somebody, issue a tweet that turns into an international incident you don't see that all the time, right? And so I think that generated a lot of interest from, Steve and I work on a unit at ESPN that this is what we do. We look into we do deeper dives into issues sometimes that involve the company's business partners. And we just thought it was fascinating, this dynamic that existed between the NBA and China. We knew very little about it. And so we decided to embark on doing some reporting around it. And that led first to this story about this question of these NBA training academies in China. They'd opened 3 or 4 of them, I believe, including one in Xinjiang. And as we dug into that and did reporting, we found out that there were allegations of physical abuse going on by the Chinese coaches there. These are NBA training academies sponsored by the NBA, run by the NBA, in tandem with the Chinese government, and coaches from China also participating. And there were allegations of abuses there, as well as coaches talking about, the level of surveillance that was going on in Xinjiang while they were working there.
Mark, how does the NBA try to marry itself? I know it has this marriage in China, but also there, as you talked about, the human rights violations. The IOC, of course, had to answer for that as well with the Uyghurs. So how does the NBA try to justify its relationship in China, even after the point where it was basically kicked out of the country for 3 years? How does it try to appeal and try to get back in this continuation? And Ravi's a great question. That why does the NBA continue to ignore the treatment of the Uyghurs and also try to justify this marriage that they're trying to do in China?
Well, I think the answer to the first question is they don't. The league is not commenting on these issues. The league basically avoids them. When we did our story about the training academies, we interviewed Mark Tatum, the deputy commissioner of the NBA, who oversees the league's presence internationally. And when we pressed Tatum on why the league had ultimately shut down its academy in Xinjiang, he said, look, did it have anything to do with human rights abuses? Tatum did everything he could to avoid talking about that topic. We asked it 4 or 5 different ways, maybe more. And Tatum's answer was to avoid that issue entirely. So the league has not addressed this question of the Uyghurs. The league has not addressed the issue of dealing with human rights abuses in China. The league's position as frankly as the IOCs and others, usually is, hey, sports are a unifying tool for America, for the world, and we're going to be part of this unit. We're going to be part of unification. We're going to be part of solving problems or bringing the world together through sports, and we're not about politics. I think there's plenty of people who see that as, well, not just naive, but perhaps impossible.
Right.
But that's the position that the league and as you say, you mentioned IOC, FIFA, they all take the same position when they're pushed on issues around human rights.
Right. You're well known for your work with Steve Williams for the breaking the Balco investigation, which, for those of you who remember, back in the early 2000s when the steroid usage was very much rampant in baseball. The Bay Area Lab Corp, I believe that's the acronym for Balco, was providing the steroids to people like Barry Bonds, Rafael Palmeiro, among others. What do you remember when you first started writing that pieces? And I dug into it, and you almost went to jail for that. And can you give us a more detailed insight into what you were actually facing with, breaking stories and having to go to jail, which is somewhat rampant and so similar to what the journalists all around the country and around the world are faced with on a normal daily basis.
Sure, I'll try to be brief. It's been a long time ago. My memory's sort of cruddy, and there's parts of it I've tried to block out of my mind, but. Lance Williams and I started covering that story in 2003. And it basically stemmed from a raid by the IRS of a lab in Northern California near the San Francisco airport. And the lab basically was providing steroids and other performance enhancing drugs to a whole range of athletes, including some of the greatest athletes in the world, most notably in our backyard, Barry Bonds, the home run king, as well as several NFL players, many other baseball players, some of the greatest track and field athletes in the world. And I think Lance and I thought that when we started covering this story, it would actually, Lance more than me probably, that it would be a relatively short story. Once the government announced indictments, you'd see the names of the athletes who were using the drugs. It would be an open secret, essentially. But that's not what happened. The government, for some reason, protected the identity of all the athletes involved. And so as reporters, we were really interested in finding out, who was using these drugs. When they were brought before a federal grand jury to testify under oath, what did they say? Did they admit it? Did they lie about it? What did they say? And so we worked on this story for several years. It ultimately led to a book called Game of Shadows. And the reporting exposed, as you noted, widespread use of performance-enhancing drugs by these baseball players. And in the course of doing that, we got our hands on grand jury testimony from a number of the athletes, including Bonds and others. And I think one of the issues that arose that you mentioned was the people were not happy about that, including the government and the judge. And they wanted to know, how did we get this information? And they believed that somebody had broken the law to provide us with this information. And so a leak investigation was started. And we were subpoenaed. We were actually issued subpoenas, Lance and myself, to testify before a grand jury and tell where we got the material. And it was really, I will tell you, it was obviously not a pleasant time. We were sentenced to up to 18 months in prison. The only nice thing that happened when we went to our sentencing hearing was that the judge let us stay out on appeal. And while we were appealing, the government found another way to find out our sources. And Lance and I have talked about this many times. The easiest part was knowing we were never going to give up our sources. This is what you do. You don't expect it's going to go this far, but you make promises and you're going to keep them. The hardest part was dealing with it really on a more personal level. I had kids at the time, they were 8 and 6, having to explain to them why dad might go to prison for doing his job was not an easy task. So, it ended up, we did not go to prison, but, the person I believe who's a whistleblower in the truest sense did, and served more time combined than any of the drug dealers or the athletes. So the case was really messed up in a lot of ways. But but it was a really rewarding and powerful story to cover for sure. It changed my life undoubtedly, and the trajectory of my career in many ways.
Absolutely, and it also led over to your work currently at ESPN, and of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about, of course, the League of Denial, which one thing when I was at Awful Announcing, we covered extensively, where ESPN had to take its name off the, or not didn't have to, but chose to take its name off of the Frontline documentary, which you worked very hard on. In regards to that, and of course the NFL, I think the ramifications of that are still with the NFL going today, and in regards to their concussion protocol, but even how they even treat concussions. What was that like when you heard that this investigation, which you had gone into for so long, but then also had to get ESPN decided to take its name off of the Frontline documentary, which was so critically acclaimed?
Yeah, it was not pleasant experience for sure. I think, we work at look, ESPN, I've been there for 15 years now. And one of the very first questions I asked when I interviewed there was, are there going to be concerns or issues about doing stories about our business partners? And the answer was no, we're not going to run into that. We're going to be allowed to do what we need to do. There's going to be effectively a separation of church and state. And look, it's a weird place to work, and it creates conflicts for sure. None more so than with the NFL, where the ESPN pays, I think it's $2 billion a year for the rights to Monday Night Football. So, I always tell people this about the experience with League of Denial. Two things can be equally true. On the one hand, it was not a proud moment, I think, for journalism and the journalists in the building. ESPN, through Disney, decided to take its name off, arguing that it didn't have editorial control over the product at the very end. I think those of us who'd been working on it knew that was sort of hard to swallow because, frankly, it was rooted in all our reporting, which had been on ESPN and been part of that all along. And so that was a bit hard to deal with, I think, politically. At the same time, none of the journalism changed and the journalism won. ESPN still aired 2 long excerpts of the documentary, which was always the plan. Myself and my brother and another colleague of ours, Peter Keating, were in the documentary throughout, so ESPN had presence all over it. ESPN ran a long excerpt of our book in the magazine and online. We were on all sorts of interview shows talking about the program, the work, and then we continued to cover it for years after, aggressively, much to the NFL's chagrin. So again, I think this is one of those deals where it's true. It's not a good look. ESPN took a bad rap for it, and probably rightfully so. At the same time, I will defend ESPN to the end about this, that nothing changed from a journalistic standpoint. The material all survived and ran. And not only that, we covered the story aggressively and continue to be interested in it.
Mm-hmm. You also continue to, as you mentioned, the conflict of also having to investigate some of the business partners, but including the investigation to the NBA and also Joe Tsai. Luckily, since that time, have you received any pushback in regards to some of the investigations into the NBA or into their the academy in China?
No, I mean the league's not happy with those stories. We have conversations that are pushed back when we're talking to PR people and others around the league. At the same time, I'm sure there are phone calls made that I don't hear about to my bosses and their bosses. But again, I always go back to the same thing. The stories ran. ESPN gave our Tsai story fantastic play on the homepage. It got a lot of viewership and readership. It got moved around the web. And, and I think that's all you can ask for. All we can do is do the stories, and people will do with them what they will. But, I work at a place that has devoted a lot of time and money to investigative reporting of its own business partners. And that's to be admired for sure. And I'm grateful to be able to work at a place like that.
Oh, Steve, you got to unmute again.
We're talking with Mark Fainaru-Wada of ESPN, investigative reporter, having on with us. Aldo posted a very good question that maybe hopefully you can give us some insight. What is the state of investigative sports journalism now with the state of newspaper industry decaying? Is new media offering sufficient resources for journalists like you?
It's a really good question. The newspaper I used to work at, the San Francisco Chronicle, I was part of an investigative team there ultimately when Balco happened, and that team died for a long time. There was no investigative team there. It started to come back now. The paper is doing more investigative reporting. I think there are other papers around the country that are continuing to do this, obviously, but it's expensive work. And as Aldo knows, newspapers are going through a massive transition and change, right? And and they're still trying to figure out how to make enough money to survive in some cases, especially much smaller papers. I think that there's sort of a twofold answer. On the one hand, there are more outlets now available as the media changes. And so there's more ways to sort of get material out there. At the same time, as I said, this kind of reporting is really expensive, both because it's time consuming. And then if you try to do it for TV, which we often do, it's even more costly. And there aren't a lot of places that have the kind of resources for that. I still have faith that the ESPNs of the world, the Washington Post, the New York Times, these big entities are going to find ways to do it, and that smaller newspapers and smaller television network stations are also, you're going to still find places that are committed to it. But in the end, I think it is a real concern as we see the shifting media. I don't think it's just a concern about investigative either. I mean, this is a concern about just covering, City Hall. This is a concern about covering stories in your neighborhoods. As papers shrink and as fewer and fewer resources are available, the ability to get sort of a diversity of opinion and information becomes more difficult.
What is I mentioned earlier about, you have written so many articles with your brother, Steve. Tell me about what is it like to work with your brother in the investigative journalism side?
So it's mostly fantastic. I mean, I'm really lucky. It's just the two of us. He's my only sibling. He's 3 years older than I am, so I have a little bit of baby brother, follows big brother's footsteps kind of thing, and that comes with its own insecurities, of course. If you're a younger sibling, you get it. But for me, he's look. I'm biased, obviously, but he's the best reporter I know. He's just unbelievable. He sees stories in really smart and thoughtful ways, and I've just learned a ton from being able to work with him. And then plus we're such close friends that being able to work with somebody you really like and respect and can laugh with and have fun with and mostly trust, because this kind of reporting really requires trust as much as anything, I think. And so I mostly just count my blessings. I'm just really lucky to be able to do it. It's really fun.
We're speaking with Mark Fainaru-Wada of ESPN, who we talked about some of his bigger stories. But I have to ask you, what are some of the stories that haven't hit the accolades that you've seen, like League of Denial and Game of Shadows, and the stories that you're doing now? What are some of the other stories that you feel most proud of that you've worked on?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I just did a story. I mean, we got a lot of attention for it, so it's not that we didn't. I did a story a few years ago with a freelance reporter who came to ESPN with a story about, it was about a guy, a track coach who had been accused of molesting boys and young men for 40 years, basically. There were dozens of alleged victims. And we ended up basically revealing the allegations against him. It'd never been made public. This freelancer found the story. He began digging into it, saw that there was a story there, and came to ESPN. And we don't actually do a lot with freelancers, but thankfully my boss saw the value in the story. He partnered myself and Mike Kessler together, as well as with the producer Greg Amante. And we published a 10,000 word story, a 25 minute TV piece, and ultimately a 4-part podcast that revealed the extent to which this guy had been alleged to have abused and sexually assaulted, dozens of boys and young men over a 40-year span. And I think I'm really proud that we were able to get all these guys to trust us and tell their stories. They're the heroes of those stories. I mean, they just don't get told without people having the courage to come forward. But I'm really proud of that kind of work.
Is there any stories you're currently working on that you don't mind sharing with us, that you're kind of like, give us a preview, like that could be like a huge one? Maybe not your colleague Don Van Natta, who broke stories about Jerry Jones's paternity test, and, Mark Cuban being accused of, stuff like that we covered last month. Is there any good stories you guys are working on right now?
I mean, I think my colleagues are always working on really fascinating stuff. For me, I'm looking for a new story, frankly. So if you've got a good idea, send it my way. I remain really interested in the NBA and the conflicts it faces over this relationship with China and elsewhere. So, I want to continue to spend time trying to see if there's material there. I don't know. We'll see. But I think whenever you can get at the sort of tension that exists for these leagues around the business and other social issues, I just think it becomes really compelling and sort of useful and revealing for readers and viewers.
Mm-hmm. Well, I will tell you, there's a story that's happening in my neck of the woods in North Kingstown, Rhode Island. Apparently, 2 high school coaches conducted naked fat tests on their students. One was a football coach, and I think there was a second coach that was also exposed in doing, not to bad pun there, but also found to be doing this as well. So it's something that's just come out. So I don't know if that be of interest of ESPN, but sure. It's just coming out about now. And the football coach was just fired for his position. He'd been there for quite some time, I think. And also there was another coach that came out as well. So I don't know if that be of interest, but it's something that it had been happening for several years. And the kids had just had the courage to come out and tell their parents about it. And it is being investigated by the state. So it's something
that's horrible.
Right. Yeah, it really is. So
I'll take a look.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So something, if you're interested in, it's something that would be great to see if ESPN be interested in investigating that. Mark Fainaru-Wada, it's great to talk to you about the work you're doing. We love to have you on again. We much appreciate it, and great to talk to you tonight.
Ken and Stephen, thank you guys so much. Anytime, holler anytime. I'm happy to do it. Thanks for the interest in the work. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Mark.
All right. Take care.
We'll talk to you very soon. And the AA team will continue. We'll have a last segment, and we'll talk about Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month and some of the things that we want to talk about, and also the upcoming shows that we'll be having in the next few weeks. All that coming up on the AA team on the Barroom Network.
The past year has seen a 1,900% rise in anti-Asian hate crime in New York City alone, with 2,800 incidents reported across 47 states and Washington, D.C. This is a national crisis, and we need your help to call it out. Call it a crime. Call it what it is. Racism. Let's stand up together against hate. Learn more at StopAAPIHate.org.
Ken Fang along with Stephen Negishi as we continue on the AA team here on the Barroom Network. Fantastic guests again tonight. Shane Hallam of Draft Countdown and Mark Fainaru-Wada of ESPN. You can't get any better than that. 2 different topics, talking about the NFL draft and then also about Mark's fantastic investigations over the many years that he's been with ESPN, and also outside of ESPN, we also talk about Game of Shadows. Stephen, fantastic stuff tonight.
Oh, absolutely. I think, we were able to cover the NFL draft with Shane. Obviously, this network will focus a lot on the review of the NFL draft throughout the week. Although we'll be doing the show with Danny Shimon and Neo Stopczynski, later this week with the special guests, and there will be more coming. And for us to have somebody like Mark Fainaru-Wada with his incredible insight and incredible career, sharing his experience. And, we had a lot of people commenting about the importance of journalism and the powers to be, suppressing and stuff like that. It's a great conversation, and we're very, very thankful people are showing a very important topic, especially in this day and age, whether it's sports or politics. So.
Absolutely. And one thing, of course, we also, as we mentioned before, we also call out bad behavior. Unfortunately, we had to talk about what happened in NASCAR over the last week or so. Denny Hamlin had a tweet, and Stephen, I'll let you talk more about this. I think you're more familiar with the story.
Sure. I just came across this a day or two ago myself, to be honest. So what happened was, I think in the not this weekend's race, but the one before, I think Denny Hamlin had a bit of an issue with the way Kyle Larson was driving. Kyle Larson is a Japanese-American race driver who got himself into a hot water and lost his racing seat, or more likely he got fired after using the N-word back in 2020 when they were doing the simulated racing as the pandemic hit the U.S. and there were no races. And so when Denny Hamlin got into a bit of a, racing, nearly got car crashed or sidewiped, I think somebody posted an Asian female driver on the Fox's hit show, The Family Guy, which we all know that if you've watched Family Guy, they always cross the line, or at least teeter borderline on, social and race jokes for many, many years, And Hamlin ended up liking the tweet somebody posted about equaling Kyle Larson's race to, Asian women driving, because Ken and I can at least acknowledge that one of the the stigmas that we the Asian people are not a good drivers. So that happened to be the one that Denny Hamlin ended up liking. We won't play this, but this is the snippets of it. If you're interested, please do it at your own risk. You will know what we're talking about.
Right.
But so Bob Pockrass, the NASCAR rider for Fox Sports, which carries NASCAR racing on Fox Television and FS1.
Yep.
He interviewed Hamlin after Hamlin was ordered to go to NASCAR initiated sensitive training. And Aldo, if you can play the video of the tweet that I had sent, please do, or at least post the article.
Going through your mind, and kind of what was the process from once you saw what the reaction was?
I don't know. I mean, I think most of it was positive, and but my reaction to the negative is that it just didn't understand what I was doing there. It's just placing a joke.
Do you think you need to go to sensitivity training?
I mean, listen, I respect their decision. I think I understand where they're at with it. I've done my own sensitivity training. I did diversity training on my own when I started this race team. I went with the best in the country and spent time with them, and I understand it all. I just I didn't think this fell into that category, but certainly I understand their decision, and it is what it is.
You're friends with Kyle. Did you guys talk about it at all?
Yeah, I mean, we talked, but I'll keep those conversations private.
Did you, when you did the tweet, did you see the Asian correlation, or did you just...
I saw the correlation in the driving. That was it. I didn't even think twice about the other, which is, that's the insensitive part, right? Is that because I'm... first of all, I didn't, but whoever created it put, I guess, his name in front of a woman who's speaking Asian, I guess you're making fun of that.
So you saw it and then you posted it.
Yeah, someone gave it to me and I thought it was hilarious, but it also is insensitive. I understand. I definitely understand how, some people could find it offensive, and if it's one, then it's one too many.
You've been pretty vocal and share your opinion on Twitter. Is this unusual?
I don't know. I mean, it's certainly discouraging from that aspect, but I'll always continue to be me, and it's not always going to be the most popular thing, but I am who I am, and certainly I never will stop continuing to grow. I always want to be a better person, better dad, better partner, better team owner, better driver. I always strive to try to be better, and I work really hard at it, and that's why voluntarily I did this, more extensive training on my own, years ago. So it just worked out the way it did, and certainly I put myself in a bad spot.
All right. Well, there are many things to go over there. First of all, saying he's done sensitivity training on his own. Obviously, he doesn't get it. Look, I know that Denny Hamlin's quite popular in NASCAR, and we're not trying to trash NASCAR as a sport.
No.
It's done a lot of progress. It's a lot of progress in trying to bring African Americans into the sport. Also, trying to reach out to become more mainstream. But then when you have this, and then you have Denny Hamlin trying to say that, well, he found it hilarious, and you can still see him smiling over the whole thing. I don't think he gets it, Stephen.
No, not at all. And the fact that he said is, I'm always going to be me is a cop-out for excuse for somebody who just can't seem to grasp it, or maybe as a leeway for another excuse when he says something insensitive, whether it's about us Asian Americans or maybe African Americans. So that's what's a little bit of a disappointment on my part. And I get it. Listen, he took the lessons, good and everything. But, it still does hurt us. Am I going to be upset to a point where I cannot sleep or boycott NASCAR, like you said? No. But let's not forget, there's Toyota is also being heavily involved in the racing themselves. So obviously this probably does not bode well, even if Danny Hamlin himself was not driving Honda. I'm sorry, Toyota Camry in the racing series. There have been some people asking me, when the hell did this stereotype got pushed? To be honest, we don't know. But if you go back to early 2000s, for those who are old enough to remember, John Rocker, the former disgraced closer with the Braves, started kind of making these rants when he went on completely off rail. If you remember, he made some off-color jokes about Asians and driving and stuff like that, or maybe Asian American
Sports Illustrated
women.
article.
That is right. If you Google it, you'll find it. John Rocker, Asian or whatever, you put it on Google, you'll probably find that article. So I actually reached out to Bob Pockrass by Twitter last night, asking him if he would be interested in coming to our show, what our show is about. And we wanted to kind of delve further into what was happening. With the this diversity stuff that NASCAR is, insinuating. Aldo, would you mind posting the screenshot that I got from Bob Pockrass? Sorry,
Okay,
that
so
was
it
not.
said.
Here it is.
Okay.
My apologies here.
Okay, so I'm very disappointed with Fox's decision, given the month that this is AAPI Heritage Month, and I believe your network is making a terrible decision to overlook our community. This is coming from you, correct?
That is correct. The blue section is what I wrote.
Yep. So basically, you asked him to come on, and Fox, I guess PR, asked him. This basically denied him from coming on and said Fox would prefer I pass on this one. So, and then you wrote that I'm very disappointed with Fox's decision, given this month is AAPI Heritage Month, and I believe your network is making a terrible decision to overlook our community. However, I will respect it as you have no control over their decisions. You continue. I hope Fox will change their mind someday, and we hope to hear from you. Our show will hope to work with other AAPI leaders in both media and sports to improve relationships with NASCAR, their drivers, and Fox Sports. And I understand where Bob is coming from. I know that he would have liked to come on. I can't speculate, but to hear that one sentence saying Fox would prefer I pass on this one, that's a little disappointing, Stephen.
No, without a doubt. Look, I wasn't taking it out on Bob, to be honest. Look, I just wanted to, gauge, what the NASCAR was doing with the so-called diversity and sensitive training, because the Danny Hamlin mentioned Kyle Larson, and as I said, Kyle Larson himself got into a lot of hot water, using the N-word, and I do remember vividly him interviewing with Emmanuel Acho, if you remember that one. You could Google that one too, folks, whether it's Google or YouTube. And I remember he was like, basically, I don't want to say half-assing it, but he was like smiling, like we just saw with Danny. You mentioned in that interview that he was talking. I thought it was a bad look for our community, considering it was very much close to the the George Floyd incident that happened around that same time, and the race relationship between Asian American and African community has not always been good. And I appreciate Kyle saying that what he did was understandable, but obviously it's not a good look. And I'm not going to say that Kyle is speaking on behalf of our own community, entire community. I'm not asking Kyle to give him a pass or anything like that, considering his own past. But Kyle has to understand, and maybe hopefully Kyle can be a voice for our community that he didn't do enough back when he used the N-word and had to go through his own demise. And we definitely need more people to be speaking out on our community, especially this month. And then and then Fox having to pass this opportunity to maybe explain their lead writer on NASCAR to give us an insight on what the NASCAR's efforts in trying to diversify and improve race relations, because we all know that it's always been seen as a Southern sports, and the history of South obviously are with the race relations has always been in question and has been seen dubious. But I will try and reach out to Fox Sports. What was not seen there was Bob telling me probably to contact somebody, the higher ups at the Fox Sports for if I had sent any questions, and if I do reach out to them, and if I'm lucky enough to get a response, I hope to share to the best of the knowledge.
Absolutely. As the little time we have to left in this hour, in this special 90-minute show, the AA team, this is AAPI Heritage Month, Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. We also talked about a little bit earlier about how we've seen an increase of violence against Asian Americans, especially in the last 2 years, especially throughout this pandemic. We will continue to call that out, and we continue to call out that behavior, Stephen. And hopefully we'll see less of that as more and more the Asian AAPI community continues to speak out, and that's what this show is all about.
Right. And obviously this show's probably not for everybody, and I get it. It's uncomfortable, trust me. But we have to amplify our voices. We do exist, and we exist for reasons. Whether people want to admit it or not. But and it's through sports and entertainment that that we can have a meaningful conversation, and then look through the prisms of our own community and the history. And if we can enlighten you and educate you, going forward. We hope you will enjoy it, and we hope that you will continue to support our show and work, as well as the Barroom Network going forward.
And we have our next show is coming up in 2 weeks. And Stephen, who do we have coming in for that show?
Well, I have been in contact with the one of the rising boxing stars, Brandon Lee. We are hoping to have him on. We have actually gotten confirmation. We'll talk a little bit more. And we hope to also have another guest of AAPI community who's heavily involved in the creation of AAPI sports site, Pranav Iyer, who works with the ESPN Los Angeles. So we hope to work on those two guests and continue to have meaningful dialogues within the AAPI community.
And we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. We'll be back on, I think it will be 7 Eastern time. We'll be back at our regular time. Coming up next is going to be talking about Chicago White Sox talk. And also, we would be remiss if not to mention that, again, this is the night of the Met Gala, and it is the 7th straight year that Jason Derulo has fallen down the stairs. If you know what we're talking about, check on Twitter. Jason Derulo has once again fallen down the stairs, and if you know that whole joke, you can get to Twitter on that as well. Thank you very much for joining us, Stephen. Have a great night. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you in 2 weeks on the AA team on the Barroom Network.